multi-step equations. So multi-step equations are basically something where you have a variable and you're trying to isolate and solve for that variable. So for example, you have, let's say, 5x plus 10 is equal to 20, right? So this is something called a multi-step variable, and we're multi-step equation, sorry, and we're trying to solve for this variable called x. I mean, this variable can be represented by anything, but we usually use in algebra we use letters such as like x, y, z. Those are the three most common, and then we can usually use most other alphabet too. But today I'll be teaching you how to solve these type of equations by isolating x. Okay, so let's start off easy first, right? Let's say we have x plus 10 is equal to 15, right? So you want to think of x as some sort of missing number. So what number would x be when you add 10? It would equal 15, right? So you want to think of it that way. So this might seem a little bit simple at first because obviously you might think it's 5, but it's important to understand the actual concept and how to actually solve because this is a very basic equation and you'll probably need this all throughout. I mean, this is mostly just like pre-algebra, algebra 1, but then if you're going to algebra 2 or higher level maths, and you'll have to do more complex forms of this. So you want to think of what's the opposite of addition, right? So x is being added to 10, and that would equal to 15. So what's the opposite of addition? That would be subtraction. So you want to get x alone, so you would subtract 10 from this side of the equation. But whatever you do to one side of the equation, you have to do to the other side of the equation too. That's a very fundamental rule of algebra. So since we subtracted 10 to this side of the equation, to get rid of the 10 and get x by itself, you'd also have to subtract 10 on this side of the equation. So 10 minus 10, that's just 0, so that we can cancel that out, because 0, we don't show 0. We won't show a 0, because anything plus 0 is just going to be itself, right? So we have x on one side, and it equals to, and 15 minus 10, that's just 5. So x is equal to 5 in this equation. And then let's move on to something a little bit more complicated. So let's say we have 2 times x plus 3 is equal to 13. So how would we solve for x in this equation? Because since there's a coefficient for x and another constant that's being added to the product of 2 and x, we would have to do multiple steps to solve for x. So a way I like to think of it is, we all know like PEMDAS, right? So parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, right? So when you're simplifying and computing equations, you have to follow this order. You have to go this way. But when you're solving, you're undoing and solving for a specific variable. You have to do in reverse order. So you would actually start by undoing any addition or subtraction. Then you would undo any multiplication or division, and that's the basic process in two-step equations or any multi-step equations, right? So we first need to ask there's what type of operations are in this equation. So there's multiplication and addition, right? So and as I mentioned before, you want to work backwards. So first we would look at the addition part, right? So how do we reverse addition? We use subtraction, and we want to get x alone. So what would we subtract to cancel out the 3 and get a 0? We would subtract 3, and since we subtracted 3 from one side, we have to subtract 3 from the other side, right? So this would cancel out, and that would just be equal to 0. And we got 2x is equal to 10. Okay, and now we're left with multiplication. And how do we undo multiplication? We do division. So the opposite of multiplication would be division. So a rule in algebra is that, let's say you have 1 times x, that's just equal to x. Because anything you multiply by 1 is just going to be that number itself. So we don't really show 1 in algebra because it would be considered redundant. How we would undo this, we'd have to divide 2, since 2 and x here are being multiplied. So to undo that, we'd divide by 2. And since we divided by 2 on the left side of the equation, we have to divide by 2 on the right side of the equation. And we cancel this out. So we're just left with x here on this side, because we don't show 1 in algebra when we're multiplying. And 10 divided by 2 is just 5. So that's the thought process and how to solve basic multi-step equations in algebra.